Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another interesting talk today. So I have the honor to introduce to you Professor Ruben Verborgh from UGent. And he's a professor specializing in decentralized web technology. He's an extremely productive researcher, publishing more papers than an average person can read. And he's also collaborating with Sir Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the World Wide Web, in making a vision of a truly decentralized web of data come true. So, Ruben, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Bart. In 2019, two of arguably the biggest AI companies on the planet introduced an extreme technical feat. They made it possible to transfer a picture from the Google headquarters to the Facebook headquarters and back. Now, at the end of 2019, this was hailed as a top invention, which, if you think about it, is kind of staggering, because 2019 was also the year in which we celebrated the 50th anniversary of the 1969 moon landing. So let me get this straight. In 1969, we were able to broadcast live video all the way from the moon, around 400,000 kilometers away, to everybody on Earth. That was possible in 1969. So why is it that in 2019 we call it a success when a single photo is being transmitted from the whopping 11 kilometers it takes to get from the Facebook headquarters in Menlo Park all the way to the Googleplex in Mountain View? Clearly something is wrong, and that something is perhaps technology, but I think more specifically the way we deal with data. Indeed, in a big data vision, where the goal is to harvest as much data as possible in one place, it might be seen as an achievement that one piece of data can escape from a silo and make it all the way to another. But in a grander scheme of things, the fact that this was hailed all around the world in tech press as a revolution, well, that shows that something is awfully wrong with the way we do innovation and data today. And I will talk about our big data problem as a first topic today, to then continue with the solid ecosystem, which is a different perspective on data and how we can deal with it. And finally, I will say a couple of words about network intelligence. So if indeed we start thinking differently about data, what are the options? What are the different ways in which we should be thinking? If at any point during this presentation you have questions, well, I guess you're all watching this from YouTube live, so feel free to add your questions to the stream. They will all be tackled at the end of the talk in roughly 35 minutes, and I look forward to discussing with you. Without further ado, let's jump into the first section, which is about a big data problem that we have. And specifically, I'm interested in the role that the World Wide Web is playing in this, because what the World Wide Web has done is actually created a gateway through which lots of data can be spread around the world. And what is so unique about the web is that it strives to be universal. The web's universality means that information should be accessible to anyone on the entire planet, regardless of what kind of hardware you're using. Are you using a laptop, a mobile device, a tablet? Well, it should still work. It should also be regardless of what kind of software you're using, the operating system you have, the kind of browser you use, the kind of app you use to consume it. And universality even goes beyond technology. You should be able to access information regardless of the language you speak, perhaps any disabilities that you have. Like if you use a screen reader, well, you should also be able to get that information. This is what the World Wide Web has done. Before the web, at the end of the 80s, information used to be locked on computers. And thanks to the web, documents are now free to roam the entire world. And they even work on devices such as smartphones that were not even invented when the web was already around. So this shows how powerful this idea of universality is, getting documents everywhere around the world. This also means that as a developer, as a creator of, let's say, AI applications, you are free to innovate. You don't have to build for a specific operating system or device, you just build for the World Wide Web. And thanks to standards, there's interoperability. Anything you build for the web will work anywhere. Now, unfortunately, this is not the default elsewhere. You could say, yeah, of course, universality. Well, actually, look at app stores. A lot of apps you find on those stores, well, they're counterexample universality, because those apps will only work on a specific device. What we also see is very often that the intelligence is just running somewhere else. So it's not local intelligence, it is intelligence that is running on some server we don't control with proprietary protocols. So this is quite against this whole spirit of universality. But the web, in its core, is for everyone. It's an invention that makes sure that information and data gets where it needs to go. And what this means for people is that the web brings freedom of expression to everyone around the world. On the web we call this anyone can say anything about anything. And the good thing is that we all have our own spaces, so we don't necessarily have to agree. I can say things in my space, you can say things on your space, and we can all say different things, and it still works. That's the magic of the web. That's decentralization also. We don't have to use central platforms to communicate. I put things on my website, you put things on yours. And if you want to say something about something I wrote, well, you can just link to it. Like if I write an article you agree with or disagree with, well, you don't have to add your reaction, your data to my website. You can just write a commentary on yours and you can link to mine, and this is how we can talk to each other. Now the equivalent for innovation, because we have freedom of expression when it comes to people and speech and so on. But for innovation, and particularly AI innovation, as we've seen it lately, the counterpart is permissionless innovation. So simply said, anyone can build anything for any reason. Because the web is a worldwide information network for people, but also apps can do a lot of things with the whole variety of information being available there. And this works because the technologies are open. People can just build new applications, they can get data from the web, and it just works. And we call it permissionless innovation because you don't need anyone's permission to join the web and launch a new idea. Right? You can't just do that. Nobody needs to give you permission. And again, you could say, yeah, of course I can just do that. Well, actually, think about app stores again. You cannot just make any app for the app store because it first has to go through a whole process. It has to be approved by certain companies. And if they don't want your innovation because, for instance, it comes too close to their business model, they will reject it. Right? So this permissionless nature of the web is very important in the access that we have to data and services. Now, this notion of universality has been under threat a couple of times in the past decades, actually since the web's inception, basically. And the first threat we've seen were the browser wars of the 1990s. Simply said, if you were not using a particular browser, such as Internet Explorer, well, then you were out of luck. The information would not come to you. Which means that not only did you need a specific browser, you also needed a certain computer. So mobile devices, for instance, wouldn't work. So if that had still been happening today, well, your smartphone would have been useless because it wouldn't, and the web wouldn't work on it unless you had a Microsoft phone with Internet Explorer. Right? So this is why universality is so important, because if we want to start using data on the web for AI purposes, for instance, it also matters. Like, you don't want data consumption to be limited to certain apps or certain vendors only. But for innovation, it's also meant that developers depended on Microsoft. Like, if Microsoft makes a crappy browser, well, too bad. You have to deal with it because this is the browser that people have. And if you want to do something fancy in the browser, well, it's not going to work. Now, you know that today the situation is very different. We have powerful browsers, we have different browsers. So how come? Who won the browser wars? Well, nobody really won. That's the interesting thing. The browser wars just got replaced by yet another battle, which are the search engine wars of the early 2000s. Because at some point, it didn't matter anymore which browser you used to access the web. What mattered more was, what is the first page you visit to get to all the rest? Simply said, what is the search engine that you're using? And this meant that for some parties, well, if you're not on Google, you're out of luck. Like, it became very important to have high-ranking content, and quality at some point was secondary. People started gaming the algorithms of the search engines, right? So this is, on the one hand, a big company producing artificial intelligence software to have people search on the web. On the other hand, people trying to crack the code and trying to get websites up that shouldn't be there. But this has nothing to do with innovation or building good products, obviously. And also means that from an innovation perspective, that the reach of the innovations you do depend on the one crawler, namely Google's. How did this war end? Well, same story, unfortunately. It just got replaced by another one, the platform wars. And this is the battle that we are still in today. And this battle has major consequences on the way we deal with data and the possibilities that we have as people working with data. Like, what we can do is shaped by those platform wars. Again, simply said, if you're not on Facebook, you're out of luck. And I mean, as an individual, as a company, it's the same thing. Like, as individuals, people do share a lot of content on Facebook. So if you want to be in, if you want to be part of that, you have to be there. Same thing for a company. If you as a brand are not advertising on Facebook, well, then it's as if you don't exist, right? And this is a world where clicks, again, became more important than high quality content. But from an innovation perspective, it means that you either compete with Facebook or depend on it. And this is an important one, right? What do I mean? Well, you have the choice when you build an app. Either you have your own system where you say, look, log in with your email and password and so on, or you say, log in with Facebook. But if you log in with Facebook, well, then from a developer perspective, you depend on Facebook to get that data to you, right? So it's either you try to collect data yourself, which makes you compete with Facebook for data, or you just concede and say, you know what, Facebook, people can sign in through you and I'll get the data via you. So Facebook has inserted itself as a data hub, and given the importance of data in our data-driven economy, this is quite troublesome, of course, as you understand, because we need data for innovation, we need data for artificial intelligence, because this is what fuels the machine. The result of that is that people's personal data has become centralized in a handful of web platforms. And content that used to be on people's personal websites and personal blogs, we find it now on Facebook, Twitter, and so on. And we have to admit, we have to give them credit for a great user experience, because this has enabled people without a lot of technical skills to still share information online. That's a good thing. However, we have lost control. And that's a very bad thing. And I'm not going to bore you with all the consequences for privacy, because they are very well known and very well documented. Yes, that's a problem. However, the loss of privacy is a consequence of something else. So we cannot fix privacy by fixing privacy. We have to look at the root problem and fix that. And as I will explain in this talk, the root problem is that we're doing innovation with data in the wrong way. Because the bigger picture here is that this universality notion is threatened. The fact that information should be able to roam freely online, the fact that data should be able to roam freely online, that is visibly threatened. And this is the bigger picture. This is a problem, because without universality, there's no freedom of expression, there's no freedom of innovation. And innovation is exactly what we want to do. We want permissionless innovation. Again. So what you see now these days is sign in with Facebook to see this content, or even worse, Facebook works better with the native app, again forcing us back in time 30 years ago before the web, where we had to have a specific device, a specific operating system for information to get to us. This is not progress. This is a major step back. And the result is this picture that you might have seen a number of times. They are the so-called walled gardens of social media. Simply said, I cannot share Facebook pictures with my LinkedIn colleagues. I have to either move the pictures or move the people. And moving the pictures or copying the pictures means I lose control, because then my data is spread out everywhere. Moving the people means that they lose control, because then I'm obliging them to join a network which might not have the best intentions, which might force them in turn to lose control over their data. So that's a problem. And during this presentation, I'll be talking quite a bit about social media, but remember, this is just an example. So while I'm talking about social media, think about all the other cases that matter to you. Another one, let's say supermarkets, for instance. Same story. They're again silos of all my data. All the things that I'm buying in one store and the other store, they all have my data. For health, it's a similar story. For employment, for lots of pieces of data are spread around. I'm talking about social media because it's a visible example, it's a very tangible example, but there's many more. Like this is about all kinds of data about people, online, offline, and so on, and the consequences on innovation. Which brings me to the next point. Okay, if this loss of control of data is such a bad thing, and if it indeed threatens universality, what should we do about it? Let's talk about the Solid ecosystem. Solid is an ecosystem and it's being spearheaded by Sir Tim Berners-Lee, who is also the inventor of the World Wide Web. And Sir Tim is basically very worried about what's happening to the web, in the sense that it was meant to be a universal tool for everyone, but because of the platformization, people are sucked into certain platforms that start to control the web in ways that are not beneficial for the system as a whole. So it's time that we take back control, and Tim himself calls Solid a mid-course correction to the web, because this is what we're doing. Now, Solid is a way of building web applications such that people can still maintain a control over their own data. And this is a matter of fixing universality, because it's not just about privacy, it's about innovation, it's about data being accessible to deliver exciting services. Now, Solid combines existing web standards to define how different parties online should interact. And the reason that a website works on a laptop, a mobile phone, a tablet, and so on, regardless of what kind of vendor has made your phone, regardless of what kind of browser you're using, that's because of standards. Technological standards ensure that documents can get from one place to another in a consistent way. So what we're doing with Solid is not building a new web. It's not a new technology stack. We want to build on top of the existing web with the same standards, the same philosophy. And just like the World Wide Web, Solid is meant to be for everyone. Now, if you remember one word, like if people ask you after this presentation, oh, what is Solid? Well, the key word here is choice. Solid aims to restore choice online, and we will do that by separating data from applications. Because today, data and applications are inseparably connected. You cannot use Facebook without putting your data on Facebook, right? And this is why we have this silo problem, because a service, an application is so tightly coupled to the data. So it's this that we want to separate. This is what we want to do. We want to pull that apart. The problem we have today is if we need to access data, we cannot choose the application. If you want to collaborate with me on a document online, well, we have to pick. For instance, if I have started the document on Google Docs, you cannot edit it with Word, for instance. We have to use the same thing. So if we need a certain piece of data, we need to use the software that comes with it. Also, the other thing, if you like working with Word online or Google Docs and so on, well, then you have to store the data there. There's no choice. So at the moment, those choices are coupled. Where you store the data is the app you use. The app you use determines where you store your data. By separating them again, we create independent choices. Then you can independently choose what application that you work with, while also independently choosing where you store the data for it. You could say, well, this is very utopic, but actually, we've been doing this for a very long time. We're taking the web back to desktop mode. Like back in the days, you could just make data on any piece of software, put it on a USB stick, give it to someone, and they could open it with software of their choice. So the idea is not that new. We've been doing that for the longest time. We just haven't done it on the web yet. On the web, with the whole cloud-based offering, those choices got coupled together. We're going to decouple them again, such that you can make whatever document you want in your application, I can use my application, and we can still work together. How will we do this? Well, it all hinges on the concept of a personal data vault or a personal data pod. Simply said, every citizen in Belgium will get their own personal data pod, and in this pod they will store the data that they create and the data that others create about them. So let me show you the transition from the situation today to the situation that we'll have in the future. On the left-hand side, you see today. This is us, the orange person there, and we've lost control of our personal data. Our data goes to different places, and this is bad for us, but guess what? It's also bad for those companies who want to innovate with that data, because there's a lot of duplicated efforts. Like, how many companies have my postal address? There must be hundreds, maybe even thousands. That's a lot of effort to collect. That's also a lot of effort to keep this up to date, because people move regularly, right? So that there's quite some effort in data collection, data maintenance, not to mention all of the legal risks you have with GDPR with storing those data. And given that artificial intelligence crucially depends on good data, this is not an ideal situation, because in this scenario, getting the good data is just too expensive. So long story short, nobody really wins on the left-hand side. Now, if we change this to a personal data vault, then it starts looking like the picture on the right. What happens is that all this data is stored in my personal data vault. And if a company wants to offer a service, they can access my data. If I let them, of course, it's my data, so it gives them control. But why wouldn't I? If they need my address for a certain service, let's say they want to deliver something, great. They can come look at it in my data vault. And if I move, I will just change my address and they will have the updated address if I allow them to, right? So there's no need for them to copy all the data around with the risk of being obsolete and so on. No, if they need something, they can just ask and I can decide whether or not I'm going to give them access to the piece of data. On the left-hand side, you have an economy where companies are working hard and competing to get as much data possible. On the right-hand side, you get a situation where companies can just use data that's already available. Why would I have to give this out multiple times where I can just say, well, if you need it, come read it and I'll give you permission. Now, what this means is that applications and services will still look the same. What will change is where they get their data. Again, let's take a simple social media example just for the sake of simplicity. The social media post. Nowadays, all of the data making up this post would come from one place, let's say Facebook or Twitter. This is big data thinking. All the data comes from one place. However, if we have the concept of a personal data vault, this changes quite dramatically. For instance, if this is my social media post, well, this picture is mine. It's going to be stored in my personal data vault. The text is mine. It's going to be stored in my personal data vault. If you place a comment on my post, well, the comment is yours. It's going to be stored in your personal data vault. If somebody else reacts to your comment, the reaction is theirs. It's going to be stored in their personal data vault. And even a piece of data as small as a like. If you like my post or like that person's reaction, well, this like is yours. It's going to be stored in your personal data vault. And then you see that easily this view can have data coming from hundreds of different places. So this is post-big data thinking. Data can have multiple sources, can be in multiple places. And that's a very different way of building. Now, what does this mean for people? Well, again, on the left-hand side, we have the situation as it is today. And there you see clearly that the apps and data are inseparably connected, right? So I have my contacts in Facebook, my contacts in LinkedIn, I have my calendar in Facebook and Doodle and so on. And then you see why it is so hard for my Facebook pictures to be shared with LinkedIn colleagues, because you really have to copy data, right? They're all silos. It also means that there's an update problem, because if I accept an event in Facebook, then Doodle won't know about it. And this is a very common situation. It's 2021 and still we as people are synchronizing data between applications because they cannot do it themselves. And this is quite insane if you think about it. Now, on the right-hand side, this is a situation you get when people have a personal data vault. And the applications, the rectangles, they're still the same apps, but data has been pushed out. Data is now in our personal data pods. And then you see that I can start with one application, looking at my pictures, and continue with another. I can choose my application from my pictures. You can choose another one, and we can still interact because the interaction doesn't go through the application. It goes through the data. I have independent choices there. You make choices, I make mine, and we can still interact. And this is what we want. Also, data here is never outdated because there are no copies. If you use something, if you look at my calendar, well, actually, it's in my personal data pod. You can just have a look and it will be there. And if I add a new event, all applications that I give permission will know about it. So this is a much easier way to work with data. And also, of course, what you see in the middle is this big orange boundary. This is me deciding which arrows go in and which arrows don't go in. So I'm in full control. And this is an interesting situation where me being in control actually ensures that more data is available, because I can share data with any application that I want. Whereas right now, every application would have to collect their own data, resulting in, paradoxically enough, less data being available. So this is great for people, but you know what? It's also great for innovation. On the left-hand side, we have the situation that we have today. We have all those big companies, those big tech companies being in a competition. And the competition is not who builds the best AI, who has the most innovation going on. No, the competition is who has the most data. That is a very boring competition with one winner per domain. You either have the most or you don't. Now, this is a two-sided innovation problem. On the one hand, the big players don't innovate. And this sounds strange, but if you remember my story at the beginning, the fact that Google and Facebook have the guts to call it a revolution, that a single photo can be sent between their offices, whereas 50 years ago we would stream live video from the moon, that kind of shows that innovation is not going great there. And also think about it. Let's say your Facebook news feed. What kind of innovations have happened to it in the past 10 years, which is an eternity in IT terms? Well, a couple of years ago, they introduced 5 emoji instead of just 1 like, but that's about it. They don't innovate, they don't have to, because they just want your data. They're in the data collection business, not in the let's give people a good experience business. So they don't innovate. That's the first problem. The second problem is possibly even worse, which is that players who do want to innovate, they can't because they don't have the data. They can't enter the market because they don't have the data. And that's even worse. So we cannot break this innovation standstill. Very concretely, one of the features that has been asked from Facebook is, show me more content I disagree with. Give me a slider that I can choose things I agree with, things I disagree with. They're not building that. But if another company wants to do that, if they have built machine learning algorithms to show you content that's perfect for you and not perfect for advertisers, well, too bad. They don't have the data. They can't launch their product. And this is why innovation today is so fundamentally broken. Now, if people take control of their data, we unlock this innovation because we get innovation on 2 different levels. We get a separate competition between applications and a separate competition between data storage providers. The storage providers, they have a competition on different offerings. For instance, do you want 3 backups of your data or 5 backups and so on? You can pick your storage provider just the way you like. Independently, you can pick your application. And interestingly is that on the right-hand side, this is not a winner-takes-all competition. There can be multiple winners. A simple example. The left-hand side, everybody uses the same app. Literally, grandfathers and grandchildren are on Facebook. Not because any of them gets a great experience, because the Facebook app is built for the average user, and neither of those 2 people are the average user. But this is where the data is. So if they want to communicate, they have to use that same app. On the right-hand side, grandfather and his granddaughter can use different apps. She can use the app that she likes, he can use the app that he likes, and they can still communicate because the communications happen through the data. This means that there's different niches in there. So there can be products for grandfathers, for grandchildren, for anybody in the market, and they're compatible because data is not stored with the app. So this is a situation where there's much more innovation possible, where we can actually do much nicer and newer things. And this picture summarizes the idea. So the tech giants at the moment, they're in a data race. They're trying to get as much data as possible. And some challengers currently are trying to do the same thing. Oh my God, we also have to start collecting data. And they try to have as much data as Facebook. Even if they could succeed, which I highly doubt, but even if they could succeed, They can never have more data than Facebook because there's a legal ceiling there, preventing anyone from getting more. So we know that this data race is finite. Yes, they have a ton of data at the moment, but getting more and more data gets more and more expensive to the point of it being unfeasible. So this whole fallacy that we can keep on collecting more data about people, we need to abandon it. Instead, we need to give people control of their data with the personal data vaults. Because if we do, there's going to be more data available. You're not going to own it as a company, but if you ask nicely, you might be able to use it. Simply said, today, my supermarket knows what I have bought, what I am buying, and what I will be buying. And they also know exactly how I walk around in their store because I scan my groceries manually. And maybe one day they will even use more big data technologies to determine exactly how many times I'm breathing in and out with what product to see how enthusiastic I am about buying something. That's a big data way of thinking. How much data can we squeeze out of any individual without thinking if it makes sense? But let's be honest. What my supermarket really wants to know is not how I'm walking around in their store, how many times I'm breathing in and out. They want to know what I'm buying at their competitors so they can make me a better offer. Guess what? With data vaults, I can say, supermarket ABC, give me back my data, stored in my data vault. And by the way, who of you wants to see your own data back? And who of you wants to see their competitors' data? And if so, what am I getting? Now, I'm not advocating here that people should start trading their data. I'm just saying that they can. If they take control, there's a potential world in which supermarket A can see what I'm buying at B and C. And it's not just a technology. In fact, legally speaking, this is already possible. With GDPR, I can say, give me my data back, and you delete it. But if we have the right data vault technology, I can also make this happen in practice. And then if supermarket A wants, they can have more data to do mining on. They can learn more about me, which is in their benefit and in mine. So why not? The difference being, they will not be in control of that data. But giving it up means access to more data. Now, this is the theory. Obviously, we have gone beyond theory as well, because Solid is not one platform. It's not a solid.com where you send all your data. No, it's a set of standards just like the web. It's an ecosystem, it's a movement, it's a community. It's an ecosystem of standards, just like the web, which will allow data to get from one place to the other, under my permission. It's a movement in the sense that we want to shift the way in which people build applications. Simply said, don't collect data yourself, use data that already exists. It's also a community of different people, companies, and organizations building things for Solid. Now, a Solid server is a piece of software that acts as a data pod to store and guard your data. There's nothing special about it. It's a regular web server. Like I said, we're building on the web, but there's support for access control and linked data. Meaning that my data can be connected to other pieces of data out there, such that I don't have to have it all in my place. Like I said, you can react to my Facebook post. Well, it will be a Solid post then, but your reaction is stored in your place, and mine is stored in mine, such that we can link to each other. So that's a very different way of thinking, not big data, but linked data. The server itself is application agnostic, so any kind of data can be stored, just like on the web. And a Solid pod is basically a website, but instead of pages, it consists of pieces of data. And those pieces of data can be compatible with any Solid app. So what can be in your pod? Well, any kind of data, social media data, but it can be my purchase history, medical files, and so on. So anything you can imagine, you can store. On the other hand, you have Solid clients and their applications that read or write data from your pod. The idea is that you give permissions to read certain parts of your data, and they can then deliver an integrated experience where they collect data from different sources and show it to you and do things for you. So the applications use existing data instead of making data themselves. What can you build with Solid? Well, again, permissionless innovation. If you can dream it, you can build it just like on the web. And the idea is that you don't have to collect data yourself. You start with data that already exists out there. And this is much more than just an idea or a set of standards. Many implementations exist and several are open source. So there's Solid servers, there's applications, there's software libraries to build your own apps. really getting this off the ground, and it's running quite well. So here in Flanders, within Belgium, we have quite some applications going on, and there is a plan for giving every citizen their own solid data vault. Now, of course, from an AI perspective, this means that we'll have to think differently, because if data is not stored in a single big data system anymore, we have to leverage the intelligence of the network. Simply said, the left-hand side is what we're doing today. Single front-end applications interface with single backends. That's a very simple way of building. However, if data is spread across different data vaults, we'll need to write apps that can read from multiple sources. We need to write apps that read data without having written it themselves. And that's a very new challenge. And to tackle this challenge, we have to follow something that's called the paradox of freedom. We can only be free to do this if we follow certain rules. Simply said, I can take my car and drive anywhere if only I stay on the right-hand side of the road. So similarly, we will need agreements to make this all work. So we want to make our own choices, but we have to agree on some basic things. Now, the good thing is that agreements can be layered. We don't all have to agree on everything. There's a small set of things we all have to agree on, like things having a label, things having an author. But then more specific applications might agree on different things, such as places, dimensions, license plates, shoe sizes, and so on, depending on what you're doing. So enabling this layered agreement is very important. And ultimately, what this means for the network is the following. This is the situation today, big data thinking. All of us, all different nodes are just sending data to one place. First step here is GDPR, get our data back. So create a bidirectional flow so that we also get the return of whatever we send to there. And once we do that, actually, we become the source of truth. The individual data vaults will be where it really happens. So yes, sure, some big data system can have a copy, but the source of truth will become with the individual data vaults. And if that happens, well, we don't need one platform in the middle. There could be many different kind of platforms. Like we don't depend on a central place anymore. This is making our own choices. And ultimately, if it doesn't matter what kind of platform that we use to exchange data, well, they might as well just not be really visible to us anymore. So what I envisage is that in the end, we'll have more of a mesh of different nodes interacting with each other. We don't really depend on those central players anymore to make things happen with our data. So this is how we can go to deplatformization and make sure that we have our own source of truth in our own personal data vaults. So I've talked today about the big problem that we have with big data, namely the finite data race that everybody's having means that everybody's in competition with each other. All companies are desperately trying to harvest more and more data. It's not in our benefit, but as I've explained in this presentation, it's not in their benefit either. Because in the very best case, they have the same data as their competitors, but everybody has to pay for the data gathering cost and for the data maintenance cost. So that's not a great idea. Then I've talked about Solid, which is an ecosystem building on top of the web, such that people take control of their own data. And interestingly, if people take control of their own data, it doesn't mean there's going to be less data available. There will be more to service providers that can have added value. So the question becomes not anymore how much data can we harvest. It becomes how intelligent can we be with data that is already available. And this is also what I've explained in network intelligence. We have to think very differently in an ecosystem way, not about how can I gather the data, but how can I work with data in a network. A very different way of thinking, which also will require very different AI solutions. Because we're so used to doing AI and machine learning on big data systems, we'll have to do it on a network. That's a very interesting challenge. Now, in computer science, this quote is often seen. It's by Alan Kay, who once wrote that the best way to predict the future is to invent it. That's very technology-centric, saying, look, we have to make stuff and then we'll see a bright future with the things that we've built. Well, this is what caused Cambridge Analytica. You build technology without thinking about the consequences. Which is why within Solid, we're much more a fan of a variation of the quote by John Perry Barlow, which is the best way to invent the future is to predict it. So simply said, predict the future that you want, personal data vaults, and then build the needed technology to make it happen. Or, in the words of Tim Berners-Lee, let's assemble the brightest minds from business, technology, government, civil society, the arts and academia to tackle the threats to the web's future. This was my story for today. I look forward to discussing with you. I just want to gratefully thank the AI Flanders program for sponsoring activities such as this one and our research. And if you want to check out more, go to airesearchflanders.be, where you'll see more talks about Solid and other AI projects. Bart, back to you.
Thanks for the interesting presentation. During the talk already, several questions have come in. And the first one is, this web universality that you're speaking of, especially with respect to the data. What do you think will be the effect on companies? Will they become more ethical regarding data storage? Or does it rather have a bad effect, since also malicious players can suddenly come in and start using this universally accessible data?
It's important to note that, of course, there's a difference between Solid and the web. The idea of the web was to spread knowledge to the entire world. We want to use the same technologies that made it easy for documents to spread, for data to spread, but the difference being that I'm in control. I can decide who gets to see what information. So that's one thing. So different system, access control. But the economics of data will also change. In the mindset of today, companies want to harvest as much data as possible because it pays off. However, with changing legislation such as GDPR, collecting data has become a liability. Suddenly, some companies are realizing it's very expensive if we do that. And we cannot look at the future with today's eyes. So yes, today companies would do that. They would just start harvesting data. But in the future, why would they have the risk of collecting so much data that is already easily available? Like, what will they do with it? So we take the competitive value out of data. And by changing that, we change economics and so on and so forth. But the basic principle remains: you're in control. You decide what happens to your data.
And maybe another question that was related to your answer now. So we're taking the competition out of it, but how can we convince the big players to play? Will they not just oppose this solid view? And for instance, one way they could do this is by, instead of storing your address in your data pod when they have access to it, they might store encrypted versions of it so that no one else can read it. So why would they jump on board, the big players who now have all the data?
Who cares about the big players? Like, we don't depend on Google or Facebook's permission to build this and innovate this. Yes, they have a lot of data today, but thanks to GDPR, I can get all of my data out of them. I can get it out of them automatically and get it in my own personal data vault. So yes, we don't depend on the big players. That's the easy answer. A more complex answer is that even they know that there's limits to what they're doing. So rest assured that within Facebook, within Google, they know that they're hitting limits for data collection, and their future business models will not be based anymore on the unlimited data collection, because that's not a sustainable plan anymore. So I'm fairly confident that behind the scenes, they're already working on alternatives, on different ways to do it. But they're not going to do that publicly because they're sitting on all the data. So obviously they will squeeze the lemon until the very last drop as much as they can. Can you blame them? Ethically, yes. Financially speaking, hell no. But it's not sustainable. There's no more growth. Google also sees that. Like the advertising segment, the growth we have there is slowing down. So even for them, it's not a good business bet to look at it. So this is why, like, yes, as an academic, I'm very much into ethics and stuff and so on. It's all great, but we have to be realistic. My story wasn't about ethics, it was about innovation. What I'm saying is that, look, the way we're dealing with data today is not good for innovation, so we need to fix it. And doing good innovation means making good money, right? This is what it's about. So ethics, as much as I like it myself, is not going to convince anyone. Companies don't care, people don't care too much. If they cared, they wouldn't be on Facebook. Money makes the world go round, so we need a sustainable business model. What I'm saying is that by taking control of their data, people will be able to get better innovations, they will get better services. And this is what ultimately will tip the balance. And it doesn't have to come from the big players. That's a good thing.
course, it then has to come from the people. And there's another question about the own your own data movement being around for a long time already and doesn't gaining enough traction. So how could we then really get all these people to start using their own data pods? And is it realistic to think that this nice decentralized view of this decentralized universal web, that it will actually happen? Is it realistic to think that?
Well, things have changed dramatically, right? I know that the whole, it's not new. Data vaults are not new indeed. They've been around for quite a bit. What is new here is that we propose this on a standards-driven way, piggybacking of the web. All previous initiatives were often well-intended companies saying, if you store your data with us, everything's going to be great. Guess what? There's no single company that can make this promise come true. So by focusing on standards, we inherently say there will be multiple service providers, multiple pod providers, and so on. So that's a different economy behind it. So that's one argument. The other thing is that there was just this very heightened optimism about big data that we've seen the past decade. Like big data was going to solve everything, right? So just bring more data in one place. What we've seen is that indeed, technologically speaking, there are no limits to big data. You can always store more. So this is why we had such optimism. However, there are legal and economical, societal, ethical limits to big data. And those limits we have hit way before we have hit technology limits. So now that we have learned from this whole decade of big data thinking, we know its limits very well. They're not technological. So I don't need to convince anyone. I'm not a person telling people, you need your own data vault. Nobody cares. I know that very well. I'm the person whose door is being knocked on by companies saying, we want to innovate. We build AI solutions. We do machine learning. We don't have the data. How can we get it? So I'm not a person saying, get your own data vault because you'll have more privacy and so on. Nobody cares. I'm saying it will be better services. Right now, people are receiving a very suboptimal service because their data is all spread around. And if they will get a better service, they will be interested, I'm sure. But it's more than just ideology. You need a perfect storm of different actors coming together. You need business, you need society, you need government, you need tech. All those need to come together with legal and so on and so forth to make it happen. And this kind of perfect storm is happening here in Flanders at the moment. So we have strong buy-in from the government saying, yes, we need a data utility company such that people will have their own data vaults. We have the Belgian industry being ready for this. Like they know that they cannot win by harvesting more data. And we do have the mindset here as well. Like people are ready for it, but they will not just do it if it costs them effort. They will do it if there's a benefit for them. So this is what we're working on. We're going to make things better for them by giving them control of their data. And that's ultimately what will make things go round.
And there's another question. It's about, well, your incoming arrows, that you have control about them. But it seems to be more a kind of a practical question. How can we really take this control? How can we cannot go approve every request. So how do you see this in practice?
Please no. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, you don't want this to be like the new cookie walls, right? Every goddamn website you visit, like, do you want cookies? No, of course I don't want cookies. Why are you even asking? But yes, show me the content. So control means that you have the option to do so if you want, because most people will not care most of the time. And they will not care equally about all kinds of data. So having control also means the ability to switch that off. Say, you know what? Approve everything or approve nothing or something in between. Or you know what? If it's about medical data, I want to click manually. Any other kind of data, I don't care. And very concretely, we want to do this like banks do with investor profiles. Like for a bank, you can tell whether you're a high-risk investor, low-risk investor, and so on, and then they will tailor the offering to you. We can do the same thing with data. Say, by the way, I am conservative when it comes to sharing data. These are my defaults. And don't ask me anything. I hate dialogues. That's possible. We can say, actually, I'm very liberal. Anybody can use my data for anything. Please don't ask me any approval, except for medical data. I want to click. Control also means you can delegate. For instance, if a question comes in like, can your insurance company read data about your last medical exams? How do I know? Is it sensitive or not? You know what? My GP, my doctor, is going to answer that for me. So control means having a choice, whether you want to say yes or no, or not do that, delegate, and so on. It doesn't mean clicking yes and no, because the cookie system that you see, this is an example of not being in control. It's somebody else forcing you to make decisions. If you're in control, you can choose whether or not to take those decisions yourselves.
Another question is about performance. So if these apps now need to go fetch data everywhere, will it not impact the speed at which they can work?
Definitely, but this is what we need to solve. This is what I meant with the John Perry Barlow quote, saying, look, we have to envisage the future that we want and then do the necessary inventions for it. So yes, obviously big data systems, very high performance, and we also very well know how they work. This is new territory, it's new technology we'll have to build. However, we have faith, we have confidence that the benefits economically and for society of doing it this way are so big that it is worthwhile to tackle those challenges. So we have to make it work. Very concretely, it's not because everybody has their own data vault that there can be no copies anymore. The source of truth changes. Right now, the source of truth is with every single company having a piece of my data. No, in the future will be my data pod. There can be copies for performance reasons, for caching and so on, knowing that they're just copies. If those cache systems blow up or disappear, I still have my data. We can still do it the slow way. Whereas today, if those central systems disappear, we can't do anything anymore. So we change the locus of control, but of course, we'll need solutions for performance and so on. We just believe it's worthwhile to invest in those.
And there's another question I think about, it's related to the incoming arrows again. So why would we limit to passive data? Could we also actively clean our data depending on who makes requests, for instance, clean out sensitive data?
Absolutely. All these things you can do when you're in control. So it's your data, you decide exactly what goes out and what stays in. And these are all opportunities that you don't have when your data is scattered around.
Someone else is asking about the parallel to cryptocurrencies, trying to innovate financial systems by going to something personal. Do you see some parallel there? Do you have any thoughts on that?
The parallel they have is they're both talking about decentralization, but in very different ways. Like cryptocurrencies and blockchains, they decentralize as follows. They say, look, we want to be able to do transactions without relying on a central mediator. Simply said, we want to all agree on the same thing without relying on certain central parties, right? With Solid, we also don't want to rely on central parties, but we want to disagree. We each want our own piece of data, our own thing, and we don't want copies at all because it's sensitive data. So what they have in common is that they both want to get rid of central players, but with cryptocurrency, it's because they all want to agree on the same thing. With Solid, it's because they all want to do their own thing, which is fundamentally very different. So they can be used together, but they don't really have anything to do with each other. There's no tight coupling there.
Are there any more questions? We still have time for a couple of questions. Yeah, maybe one question came in earlier as well. It's about the cost of data storage. Currently, Facebook is paying for the data storage. We don't have to pay for it. If we want to take back control, we will have to pay a bit. That blocks us. Who will pay it, actually? Who will pay for the data storage?
The same people that are already paying today, which is you. Like, people often say, yeah, but Facebook is free. Well, it's not. Facebook is a deal in which you pay with your personal data. And I'm not saying that is wrong. What is wrong is that you don't have a choice. You can say, hey, Facebook, here's $5 a month, but please don't mind my data. I'm a paying customer now. No, you pay with your data or you don't get access. As I said, Solid is fundamentally about choice. So there will be different choices in the data provider market. Some might be free, but then you pay with your personal data. Some might be paying, but then you know that your data will be shielded better, right? Now, the way we want to go about this in Belgium is by seeing it as a utility, just like gas, water, electricity. How this works is that the government regulates. It says these are the rules that any electricity company has to abide by. Like you have to follow these rules, and if so, you can have a company. But citizens can choose freely. Same with gas and water and so on. Now, the interesting bit is that here in Belgium, every citizen gets a yearly free allowance of water, gas, electricity, the basic needs, right? And all the rest you pay more for, and you get it with a provider of your choice. Imagine if we do the same thing with data vaults. There's many data providers. The government regulates them, saying, look, this is how you have to keep data safe. People choose their company freely. The government gives them a free allowance of 2, 5, or 10 gigabytes per year, whatever people need, such that their elementary data needs are being met. If you want more, no problem. Provider of your choice, you just pay whatever you want. So by looking at it this way, by having tightly regulated markets in collaboration with government and companies, we can still make sure that everybody has their basic needs met, whereas if you want more, you just pay for it. And you pay how you want. That kind of choice is important.
And the last question for today, it is about a time horizon. So could you give an educated guess as to in which time span we can implement this, we can really start working in a decentralized web?
The first pilots are already under their way, right? So we have the standards are quite far progressed already. There's implementations of solid pods, and there's commercial offerings, there's open source offerings. So these things can already start rolling. We're currently in a phase where we're looking for early adopters. We're looking for companies who want to make the jump, who want to make this happen. So all of these pilots are already happening. They're under their way. When will the whole world have changed? That's too big of a question to answer. I think this is more a 10-year plan than anything else. However, here in Belgium, we're moving fast. So expect to see some decent changes already the coming years. If you're a company who wants to start working with Solid, you already can. And you can be part of the early pilots that, for instance, the Flemish government is really heavily looking into. So if you want to get started, get in touch with me. I'm very happy to connect you through. But timeline-wise, see some big changes happening the next couple of months, the next couple of years. This won't be an overnight change, but it shouldn't be decades. We're talking about within a couple of years, you should already start seeing the first changes actually happening here. And if you see at a concrete plan here in Flanders, people should have data vaults on a very close horizon.
Okay, thanks a lot again for the nice presentation and interesting answers. Then I will just announce the next talk that will start in, I think in 5 minutes, if I'm not mistaken. So Mr. Ferdinand Cassier will talk about how AI can solve your workplace safety problems. So thanks all for watching this. See you in the next talk.
Thanks all, bye-bye.